Okay, welcome back to my car. As you can see, I am here again. Where was I last week? No, I was in my room last week. Anyway, today we're going to continue our conversation on leadership. And this has been my favorite series of videos that I have done so far because leadership is important. It affects every area of our lives, whether that's in business, family, friendships, just everyday life. If you're trying to succeed and get somewhere important, leadership matters. So that's why I want to continue talking about leadership with you guys today. And today we're going to be talking about a really important component of leadership, and that is culture creation. Leaders create culture. So if you want to hear more about that, keep listening. Go ahead and like and subscribe to my channel if you're enjoying this content. I really love making it for you, and I'd love to hear more about what you'd like to hear from me as well. So go ahead and leave a comment down below, subscribe, like this video, and let's get started. We've been talking about leadership, and the first video that I shared about leadership talked about influence, and basically influence and leadership are interchangeable words. Leaders have influence. They affect change in the communities that they are a part of, that they are leading, and really the leader in the room is the person with the most influence. It's not the person with the highest title or position, it's the person who has the most influence for that group of people. Influence matters. Influence is what changes the world that we live in on a daily basis. So if you don't have influence, you're not really a leader. Maybe it's just a superficial title. So these are really important things to consider when we're talking about this topic of leadership. And then last week we continued this conversation about leadership, and today we're going to be talking about culture. Culture is the environment of the organization that we are in, and culture starts from the top down. So whatever happens at the top of your organization, whatever culture exists there, it's just going to be perpetuated through the rest of your organization. And so if leaders are operating without taking into account the culture that they're creating, again, like I've mentioned in the last two videos, you will be leading people on this journey, but you're not going to be aware of where you're leading them to. And if you want to understand more about that journey that I talked about, I'm going to link that first video right up here so that you can learn about that influence in the journey that you're taking your people on. So once we've realized that we are influencing people, now we want to look at the culture of the organization as a whole. This is really important for growth because we can have goals, a 10-year plan for our organization, for our group, whatever our situation is. We could have goals, but if we aren't aware of how the culture is influencing those goals and that progress, then you're never going to get where you'd like to go, because culture affects everything. It affects morale, it affects productivity, it affects team bonding and teamwork, it affects the overall competency of your people. Culture is really the center, it's the core of everything. And people usually want to start with creating systems and processes to get your group where you really want it to go. But if you don't start with establishing the correct culture that you're looking for, then you're really not going to get anywhere. Let's think about culture in our society. Culture is the established norms in your organization or in your people group. Culture is comprised of all of the traits that people deem as socially acceptable, and you are usually praised for uplifting the culture. If we look at cultures around the world, whether that's American culture, African culture, South American culture, these different places, these different regions, these different people groups have different cultures. You see different cultures among family, food, music, all of these things. Their cultures are widely different across the planet. You know, culture changes depending on where you are geographically. It also changes depending on your age. You know, different generations have different cultures. Gen Z, millennials, boomers, all these different generations have different cultures based on the circumstances that they grew up in, based on what was acceptable at the time that they existed. Or I guess the formative years that they were really growing up in, right? Thinking about culture as an accepted set of norms and values, then we need to look at our organization and identify what our current culture is. Before we go into changing the culture, we need to identify what culture already exists. We often think of culture based on ethnicity or nationality, but culture is really just this set of norms. And so maybe take Take a moment to think about your organization that you work in, or the environment that you are serving in, volunteering in, that you're a part of, and think about what the culture is. I'm going to give you some examples and maybe this will help, but is there a culture of encouragement? Is there a culture of teamwork? Is there a culture of accountability, camaraderie, or is there a culture of sarcasm, of negativity, of blame shifting, of scapegoating? Are there cultures established? Are there norms accepted that are positive and beneficial, or negative and detracting from the overall productivity of your organization? Think about that for a moment. And if you're the leader in that situation, then you need to take a step back, take a look at those norms, and ask yourself, is this my doing? The answer is always yes. Culture starts at the top. Leaders establish or accept culture. We as leaders need to take responsibility for the culture that exists in our organization, in our community, because no matter what, whether you were the instigator of the culture or the acceptor of the culture, your job is to set the tone. Now, if you've ever heard this analogy, leaders are not a thermometer, they're a thermostat. Leaders are a thermostat. And what does that mean? A thermometer takes the temperature of the room and just tells you what it is. If it's 98 degrees in here, they're just going to tell you it's 98 degrees in here. But a thermostat sets the temperature. Now, as a leader, you don't want to be a thermometer. You don't just want to observe and understand what's going on. You want to be the person who is ahead of the game and setting the tone, the environment, and the culture for your organization. So in order to do that, first we need to recognize that leaders have influence and that leaders establish culture. Let's say you just became a part of this organization and you're trying to foster an environment of growth. You have these goals, you want to meet your quarterly budget goals, you want to meet your team onboarding goals, you want to build this organization, you want to really be innovative and grow. Okay, we can create those goals, but first we need to take a step back and look at the culture, because if your culture does not foster a community of growth and productivity, then you're never going to reach those goals. So how do leaders reset culture? As a leader in your organization, whether you're new there and you're wanting to restart the culture, or you've been there for a long time and you're noticing now that the culture is not productive, how do we reset the culture in our organization? I'm going to give you 3 tips really quickly on how to go about reestablishing culture in your organization. Number 1, we want to name it. If you are sensing that there is a dysfunctional or unhealthy culture in your organization, the first thing that you need to do is you need to name the issue. We need to look around and put a specific pinpoint on the issue. Now, if you want help with the specific goals and things like that, I'm going to link my video right here that I did with my friend Evelyn on how to set SMART goals. And a big component of setting those goals is being specific. Now, this is an important component of setting culture, because we need to know specifically what's wrong so that we can give it the right medicine. Now, imagine going to the doctor and they say, you have X, Y, and Z symptoms, so we're just gonna give you whatever medicine I can find and hope that that works. You need a new doctor, because that doctor is gonna kill you. You can't just medicate an issue when you don't know what you're medicating. Okay, we need the correct medicine for the issue at hand. So with that said, we need to name the problem. Is it sarcasm? Is it blame shifting? Is it laziness? Is it a lack of accountability? We need to name these issues and really address the specific issue that we're dealing with, because once you do that, once we name the issue, we can move on to step 2, which is counteract the issue. So once we've named the specific issue, we want to find the opposite of that. If it's negativity, positivity is the opposite, right? So if it's sarcasm, what is sarcasm? It's kind of a negative lack of transparency. It's something that's pretty degrading for most people, and it's basically a lack of authenticity. We don't want to say what's wrong, so we sarcastically, passive-aggressively address the issue. So the counter for that would be encouragement and authenticity. We want to be encouraging and authentic. We want to be truthful to people. So we're going to counteract sarcasm with authentic encouragement instead. And then if we have an issue of laziness, then there's still a root deeper than laziness. It could be they're unmotivated. It could be that there's a lack of clarity in the organization. Maybe they don't know their next steps. So there's a lot of different components to this. You want to dig deeper and name the really specific issue. So let's go with if it's a lack of clarity that's causing people to be lazy, then we want clarity, right? If it's a lack of motivation, then we want to motivate our people by having incentives. We want, whatever it is, okay? So name your problem and then counteract your problem. So name your problem, counteract your problem. Step 3, set the example. This is by far the most important. That's why I went through those two pretty quickly, because setting the example is the key for any organization. Leadership leaks. So if the leader is acting a certain way for a long period of time, eventually it's going to leak down to everyone else in the organization. And that's what we want when we're doing this properly. So if your leadership is sarcastic and negative and lazy, then no matter how good the people are that you've hired and you've brought on board, they're going to adopt your culture because they're going to see that's the norm and that's acceptable. So I'm going to do that as well. Now you might think as a leader, well, I'm at the top, I have the right. Notice that I have the right to act this way. They need to do as I say, not as I do. This is very important to recognize that is dysfunctional. Okay? Leaders cannot act a certain way and then expect their people to act differently. Leaders go first. And this is a big component of leadership, and it affects culture so greatly. And if we don't realize it, it can affect culture so negatively. And we need to realize that as leaders, we lay down our rights for our people. If you're not okay with that, then you shouldn't be a leader. Leaders lay down their rights for their people. And what that means is that you don't have the right to slack off just because you're the top dog. You don't have the right to make sarcastic comments just because you're in charge of the team. You don't have the right to X, Y, and Z just because you've made it, because you haven't. And that's a big component of leadership, is that we lay down our rights for other people because we have never arrived, okay? You are never so important that you don't get to partake in the culture. You create the culture. Okay? And so looking at this, we need to set the example. And if you want to create a culture of encouragement, you need to be the most encouraging person on your team. If you want to create a culture of ownership, then you need to take the most ownership of your organization. You need to take ownership of everything that's happening in your organization. Otherwise, you can never expect your people to take ownership. It's just not going to happen. So these are really important components of leadership. And if you want more resources about this, I'm going to suggest that you read The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. That book is so incredible for team building and teamwork. But these 3 components of culture creation are super important, because if we name the problem and counteract it and then start the change, if we are the change, be the change that you wish to see in the world, if we are the change that we want to see, then our organizations are going to thrive. Then you'll be able to meet all of your goals. Then you'll be able to be innovative and dream bigger and go farther than you ever anticipated. But if we don't start with the culture, you will always have a lid on your organization. So I really want to encourage you that if you start here, start from this core, rather than starting with all of the superficial parts of an organization. If you start at the core and really work to be the most encouraging, to be the leader who sets the tone and the culture for your environment, your organization is going to have no limit to what it can do. And that's exciting. Before moving on and ending this, I do want to just say one thing. If you're not in charge of the organization, if you're not in charge of the people, and if you're just a part of the team, that doesn't make you less of a leader. Everyone is a leader if they decide that they're going to influence people. And if you decide that you're going to set the tone and the culture for that group, when the positional leader won't, then you are going to end up being the one who leads that team. Culture matters. And if you are not the one in charge, that does not mean that you can't set the culture. It just means that you need to decide to be unwavering in the culture that you want to partake in, even when everyone else doesn't. And over time, you will have influence in that group of people. So I want to encourage you in that, whether you're the top dog or whether you're the underdog, it doesn't matter, because you have influence when you decide to lay down your rights for the people that you are serving and leading. And so I encourage you in that. I hope that this was helpful to you, and I hope that you guys enjoy this type of content. I love talking about leadership. I think it's really valuable for us to understand what leadership really looks like. It's not a position or a title. It is a state of being, and it's a decision that you're going to influence people and lay down your rights. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope to see you guys next week. Again, like and subscribe. Leave a comment down below of how you feel about the culture in your environment that you're currently in, and maybe some things that you want to change, or maybe some things that you love about that culture. Let's just have a conversation about culture in our organizations and our environments. I'll see you guys next week. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.